increase the mics a little bit? Okay. Yes. Perfect. And he made it. Okay, is this better? Can people hear me? No, still not. A mix. Okay, if there's any way we can increase the mics a little bit so everyone in the room can hear, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. Nice to meet you all. Very excited to be here. Thank you to the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub for hosting us. We're very excited to be here amongst all other parties who are innovating and are learning a lot from the sessions here so far. My name is Anna Lerner. I'm the CEO of Climate Collective. Climate Collective is a small but mighty innovation network of climate tech startups, investors, scientists, and nonprofits. We support entrepreneurs that are working on climate tech or nature tech, particularly if they have a digital or digital technology solution. Some of our members are here today, very excited to see you all. I'm thrilled, though, to introduce to you a very distinguished and deeply expert-level panel. I'm going to be lazy and let the panelists introduce themselves when I give them the first question. But I just want to give the overall context of why we are here. Should I scream? Should I try to speak louder? Is this better? Okay. Yes, I know I can hear them. I can't stop them, though. So, digital innovation is part of the climate tech ecosystem. It matters a lot for lots of different reasons, and you'll hear about the impacts and the reasons that we're seeing from digital tech on the panel. But I want to flag one thing that I think is really important and that keeps me really anchored and focused on digital tech and data. We don't have time. Climate change is a time game, and we're running out of time. Digital and data can't solve all of this. We need hardware technologies, we need solutions, we need people, we need communities, we need so many things to fix this problem. But digital and data can help accelerate the progress, can help us speed up and try to catch up to where we haven't been able to get so far. With that, I'm going to hand the floor first to Yuri. And I have a specific question for you. Do you have a mic? Yes, perfect, you're all set. So, IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, has launched a number of really impactful digital initiatives in recent years. Can you mention one or two that you think can be particularly impactful for advancing climate and nature goals?
My name is Yuri Suarez. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. I'm Chief Impact Officer of IDB Lab. IDB Lab is the part of the IDB group that works with entrepreneurship, innovation, and in this context, we work with climate tech companies a lot. So what are we doing? Two things that I want to mention which are particularly interesting. The first thing is that we launched 3 years ago a Web3 platform where all of our clients, innovators, and generally, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector, NGOs also, can book their apps on this platform, which is called LACchain. And we have over 90 applications running on LACchain, and this year, actually, we're conducting the challenge right now. We're running a competition for climate tech innovators to be able to use this Web3 platform to develop their specific solutions for climate tech. And we're doing this together with the World Food Program Accelerator, IFAD, CGIAR, ADB, and the World Bank. So we're doing it together. What's the advantage of this? The advantage is that you can get early stage companies, provide them coaching and provide them assistance and really accelerate and reduce their runway for those solutions in climate tech. So that's one thing. The second thing I would like to mention is an initiative that we have called NaturaTech. Now, NaturaTech is focused on developing digital solutions in forestry and in land use in particular, and it's not limited necessarily to digital solutions, but it is a bet on the fact that we really urgently need to have an ecosystem of climate tech developed in the region. Right now, the latest data that we have from Holland IQ, which is doing a thorough review of every single climate tech company in the Latin American region, we probably have fewer than 1,500 climate tech companies of all stages, okay? That very early pre-seed all the way up to, you know, Series C and higher. And this has been growing over time, but I think it's really fundamental that these enabling conditions early on can help accelerate exactly what you're talking about. And digital technology is a huge part of that. Every single company that we've run through these challenges has a digital solution, every single one. They may have other things beyond digital solution. All of them are doing this on a digital platform of some sort.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I think everyone that works in climate and nature on the ground appreciates the need for bottom-up innovation when it comes to this. So these digital solutions coming top-down are not always appropriate for the local context. So it's encouraging to hear that you're going to be able to increase this number of 1,500 startups that can kind of grow and expand from Latin America. Fantastic. Chandra, carbon markets. Carbon markets is an incredibly important tool to unlock finance to decarbonize the world, right? We have lots of different carbon structures. You can have a carbon tax, you can have an ETS, emission trading systems, and then we have the voluntary carbon market. I'm personally, and my members are personally very grateful to the World Bank for being so progressive and active in strengthening the voluntary carbon market. And you particularly have been leading this whole suite of tools to drive an end-to-end or enable an end-to-end digital carbon market. Can you tell us why you think digital innovation is so important for carbon markets?
Sure, and thanks again for the invitation to join here. Let me introduce myself. My name is Chandrasekhar Sinha. I'm the Global Lead for Carbon Markets and Finance at the World Bank. And I've been doing, as many of you know, this carbon market thing for a long, long time. And it's a particularly fascinating area, this convergence of carbon market with digital technology. And I will focus on, Yuri talked about all the wide range of applications you can have. I will focus just on the carbon markets. And the work that the World Bank does on the carbon markets, and then I'll come to your question, Anna, as far as the digital ecosystem is concerned, is a part of the Climate Warehouse Program. And the Climate Warehouse Program, as you mentioned, has this goal of an end-to-end digital ecosystem anchored around a global metadata layer called the Climate Action Data Trust. This was launched about a year ago in partnership with the government of Singapore and IETA, and it aims to connect the different registry systems from independent standards to sovereign registries into one big metadata layer which gives transparency to the market. You get a better sense of what's happening across the different jurisdictions, across the different standards, across different time frames, across different applications. So the effort of it to be anchored around the Climate Action Data Trust is then to build the upstream systems in a way that is consistent with this global metadata layer, which took about 3 years of consultation to agree on. What exactly would be the minimum data that would be necessary for each of the connected registries to integrate within their systems in order to give the transparency that is needed to the in the market, transparency for carrying out the integrity checks, understanding how you can build the upstream system. So starting with the Climate Action Data Trust, you move to registries, where carbon assets are actually held. Once they're issued by a standard or a sovereign, they're held in a registry. To have that registry being totally aligned and interconnected to the Climate Action Data Trust is an integral part of our vision of how you create liquidity and fungibility across the full market. These registries should then be connected upstream further to digital monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, which gives credibility to the data that is coming from programs and activities that generate carbon credits for the carbon market. And the use of Earth observation system, other remote sensing technologies, smart meters, IoT devices, whole range of things that go into moving into the digital realm for the monitoring system, which then becomes faster, cheaper, much more transparent. The final two elements of this, and those of you who are interested in the full end-to-end ecosystem can come back here day after tomorrow, where all the partners working on the Digital for Climate partnership will talk about the different components. The final two elements is a tokenization platform, so that the carbon assets are issued on a digital platform and can be transacted without the friction that is currently associated in the carbon markets. And then finally, a web-based tool that links to the registries and the MRV system for generation of the related documents for the carbon markets. And this is being done in partnership with the UNFCCC, Global Innovation Hub, who are hosting us here, UNDP, EBRD, European Space Agency, and IETA. So it's a partnership of a group of like-minded multilaterals, if you will, entities who are trying to create a system which is more transparent, more efficient, lower transaction cost, and less friction.
Amazing, thank you. That's a great segue, actually, to Leticia. And before I give you the word, I think the carbon markets this last year have had this big kind of soul-searching moment where there's been a lot of talk and work around process integrity. So trying to strengthen the processes that are in place, the methodologies, the principles. And process integrity needs data integrity to be meaningful. So if we just add another layer of processes or principles and the data is the same, it won't really improve that much. The great news is we have digital technologies today and a lot of innovative solutions to capture much better and higher quality data. For that to work, though, there needs to be capacity. So I want to turn to Leticia from UNDP. UNDP is playing such a central role in building digital carbon registries and strengthening capacity around transparency and NDC implementation around the world. You serve 190 countries or something like that. So I would love to hear your perspective. How do you see high integrity carbon markets as a way for countries to finance their NDCs?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for the invitation. I'm glad that Chandra came before me, so I don't have to go too deep into the digital side of it. But we are happy to partner with the World Bank and other partners in this broader digital ecosystem to ensure transparency. What we are actually working more directly is on the development of the digital national carbon accounting registries. And for us, even though we work with over 190 countries, as you mentioned, we maintain the idea that these solutions need to be tailored to the specific countries. So everything that we do starts with an assessment of the existing capacities in the countries, what the countries have in terms of infrastructure, and how much data and information they have in order to put it on the different systems. It wouldn't make sense to build systems for countries that don't have the data. And that's a big component of transparency, working to develop this data. UNDP supports several countries, many countries, in the development of their national greenhouse gas inventories, which is the basis for all this information that will later on be part of the NDC. So we work on the systems that will be integrated into the larger ecosystem, and we make sure that these are open-coded, because as Chandra was mentioning, the idea is to make the solutions more effective, less costly for countries, so that they can be adapted to the specific infrastructure that the countries already have. So when we do this pre-assessment, we evaluate what are the existing systems that these countries already have, what type of information do they have ready for transparency, what are the gaps, what type of programs can support in the development of this data, and how this open source code can help build further integrity into the systems through carbon registries. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to my left now. I'm going to bring this with me. Bill, you have 30, 40 years of experience across these markets. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about one of your most recent projects, which is called the Ethereum Climate Platform. It's an effort of a group of technology companies to pool best-in-class technologies and services to accelerate investments towards high-integrity climate mitigation outcomes. When you approach investors about this way of pooling technologies, leveraging technology, and increase capital towards climate mitigation outcomes, how do you explain the transformative role that digital technology is having within this effort?
Sure. Okay, I know we can hear them, but I'm not sure they can hear us, so I'll try to speak up, and we'll try to let them hear a little bit of our talk. So yeah, Bill Kentrup, I'm a co-founder of All Infra. We build digital solutions for environmental finance, so anything from digital green bonds with data that feeds from the assets to bondholders, together with data that feeds to the production of carbon credits and informs holders of long-term contracts as to the production at the asset level. And I think Chandra and Letitia covered quite a number of aspects of putting that prospect of green finance on digital rails and the benefits that that brings, but maybe just to kind of shine a light on how I think of it from a carbon investor perspective and how I articulate that. So 8 years I ran Macquarie Bank's environmental financial product and environmental infrastructure business in Asia, and for 7 years I was with a trading company. We set up one of the first carbon investment platforms in Asia. And one of the challenges is you're investing in projects in many different countries, often many projects in remote areas in many countries, and we're putting long-term, often 5-year capital into those assets and getting paid back in an instrument that is in the form of an emission reduction of some description. And I'm sitting there with lots of capital deployed, with almost zero visibility as to what's going to come back and when. And if you would imagine, at times we'd have 30, 50, 60, 70 projects on the books. We are trying to manage our risk, both whether we're going to be long or short at the end of the year, whether we should sell some forwards, whether we should sell some options, and it's extremely inefficient and costly to manage a carbon book. And if you're an institution and you're putting capital out the door, even in the form of green bonds, and you're trying to kind of measure, is my green book on the debt capital market side, is that hitting its targets? Having the traditional process, which is maybe once a year, site visits, data gathering, putting that data through spreadsheets and then reporting that, it's very opaque, and maybe you get insight into what the assets, how the asset's performing once every half a year or once a year. Putting that on digital rails, in addition to all the things that Chandra and Letitia mentioned, as a holder of those assets, I've got that predictability. So in one side-by-side we did for a voluntary carbon market project, what a 5.5-month measurement, reporting, and verification process we compressed into 2 minutes. So we had every data collecting every 2 minutes. The moment you need that data and need it to be transferred and run through digital methodology, so you have the final outputs, about a 2-minute process. And the cost was less than 10%. So if you look at it from out-of-pocket cost, time, there's a lot of value there, but the commercial value to an investor and that option value to convert production to product, and the visibility to be able to hedge your risk, if you're a compliance buyer or even a voluntary buyer, to know where you are relative to the targets. Having everything on digital rails provides a lot of insight. I would just add one more thing, that having, as was mentioned, then the product baked into a smart contract, so whether that's the carbon forward agreement, your 5-year carbon forward, or the actual final delivery product, having that in a smart contract, a lot of what that's doing is already self-performing corresponding adjustments if that's necessary. And so the data, the transfer, the production, the transfer and retirement is all recorded. And so the additional step of, okay, now how do we do the government-to-government carbon accounting? It's already done. And so happy governments makes lives of investors easier. So it just kind of putting the ecosystem on digital rails just makes everything a lot more visible, traceable. You can look back on it 3 years later and not fumble for contracts and purchase agreements and reports on a nonprofit's registry, but rather just look at your permissioned access and use a blockchain explorer and see what you've actually retired at from any asset at any moment. So that's yeah.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Raf, Toucan. You will have to tell the audience a little bit about you, a little bit about Toucan, and then I would love for you to talk a bit about a recent partnership that you've announced with Puro Earth. So now we're talking about removals. Can you explain a little bit why building a two-way bridge for the Puro carbon removal credits are so impactful for many of our efforts to scale the carbon removal markets?
Sure. Thank you, Anna. So yes, I'm Rafael. I'm founder and CEO of Toucan Protocol, where we're also building digital solutions for the environmental markets. Our key focus is registry and market infrastructure. As you just said, we've just announced, or we finished a partnership, or like the development of a product. It's a two-way bridge to the carbon standard Puro.Earth. We're the first ones to build like a fully automated two-way bridge to that standard. What a two-way bridge basically just means is that we have developed a way to tokenize and de-tokenize environmental assets, or like carbon credits that are on the on the Puro registry, which are called corks. So to turn them into tokens, but also turn them back into traditional database entries, which was really like a key missing piece, I would say. So historically, we have facilitated over 20 million credits to be tokenized through our infrastructure. However, most of these credits, for security reasons, only were able to be brought on-chain and not back into the real world. So obviously this is, was mostly an MVP. So now we have a fully automated system using their API and our technology to go back and forth, which reduces the kind of lock-in risk by turning your asset into something different, so now you can turn it back. Why we believe that, I think there's a bit of a theme here in this panel, like that Web3 technologies are actually impactful for environmental markets, is because environmental assets like carbon credits are really just a bunch of data and signatures that attest that the data is true, right? We ultimately have to trust that some sensors or some humans have collected the right amount of data, or the right data, that data is correct. And so really at the end of the day, it's like that chain of trust is really crucial in the production of a carbon credit. But it also goes on, like once a carbon credit has been issued, today in this market we have very little pricing data, right? So as an end buyer, when you want to buy a credit from a specific project, it's really hard to know what the true value and the true price of that credit is. And let's say if you pay $20, how much of those $20 actually landed with the project owners, the people on the ground? All of that is like pretty impossible to know today. So why we believe that turning today more of like a PDF-based carbon credit into a digital asset is that we can append that data. We can have a dynamic carbon credit that over the lifetime of the project, over the lifetime of the credit being in circulation and ultimately retired, we can always add more data once we generate more data. And this can be additional ratings data from third-party rating agencies like Zero or others. But ultimately, it's really that like reducing that risk for the end buyers across a broad range of standards, right? Because the carbon market is, like anybody who's dipped their toes in, is really, really complex. And there's not, we lack that level of comparability between the credits, which is why, I'm super grateful for some of the efforts on the right side of this panel to like bring more transparency and comparability. And the goal of Toucan is really just like to aggregate that, make it easier for programmers, for corporations, for all the intermediaries to use that data efficiently. So,
fantastic. That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Finn, last but not least, I would love for you, I'm going to switch your questions, so bear with me here. Pay attention. I would like you to build on this concept of trust and transparency and lift it a little bit higher than carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets. I know that you as a rating agency at B0 are looking at also rating other types of aspects, collaboration agreements under the NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. So could you talk a little bit about both what you do as a rating agency and how you are looking at Article 6.2 or 6.4 opportunities where ratings could really play a transformative role?
Sure. It's great to be here, so thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, to take it up that level, which I think you're asking, it's really about what we mean by public markets, public information, and public confidence. Ultimately, for carbon credit projects, if they go wrong, we all suffer. Socially, we suffer. Environmentally. And I worked in government, so ultimately the taxpayer picks up the bill somewhere down the line, right? So, is that better? Okay, so summary, public markets need public information, really, is what we're talking about here. And I think carbon markets have been going through a number of iterations about in which they've lost public confidence. And to take it to Article 6, if we don't build them with public information at their heart, I'm very worried that they won't scale successfully at all. So that's the ethos we have in B0 Carbon, but I think it's the thread that perhaps ties all of these speakers together. We believe the market needs information rails that are available to everybody. So we do carbon credit ratings, which is assessing the likelihood that a project actually delivers a ton of CO2 reduced or removed. But outside of that, what we do is we leverage digital technology. So what does that mean? It means if you're thinking about basic information about a project, where is the project located? It's not actually immediately evident from projects where they're situated currently. So in many cases, we have to reconstruct digital boundaries of the project and use them to analyze them. What else do we look at? Well, what are we examining? We're examining carbon stocks. There's been a huge wave of innovation in different forms of Earth observation technology, which can help to corroborate and in some cases provide much better estimates of carbon stocks in different landscapes. That's number 2. Number 3 is monitoring change over time. There's a bunch of others. Number 4 is thinking about future risks, such as natural hazards, such as fires, etc. All of these effectively use different forms of digital technology. Within Article 6, for Article 6.2, which is where countries can trade credits bilaterally amongst each other, there are provisions, as you know, around confidentiality in those agreements. There's very little supervision at all there. And what does that mean? It means if you're examining that market, there's very little information you can draw on to assess whether or not these projects are reducing carbon or not. So that's where we feel carbon credit rating agencies can play a crucial role, because in the absence of supervision, there is very little incentive for stringency and no incentive for dynamic improvements in projects over time, which is what we believe we need to see, a race to the top, if you will, for this market to succeed.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to Yuri on the side there. We've talked a lot about this, the notion of benefits for society, benefits for nature and climate, and how it's all interconnected. We need to kind of make sure that all of these groups benefit at the same time. Digital technologies can be a great equalizer. I think of it often as it enabling better access to markets and resources, and maybe also funding for frontline communities that are protecting important environmental hotspots, or either biodiversity or conservation. IDB has a vast program supporting people and nature in Latin America and the Caribbean. Can you talk a little bit about ways that IDB is harnessing this global assessment, global resource of biodiversity and conservation in the region, but making people benefit and being involved in the conservation work?
Yeah, no, the key is the key is really having that involvement and those benefits accrue to those who are in the last mile, and tech does allow us to get there cheaper, quicker, and probably more accurately than we would, you know, going back to the analogy of the MRV audits that took so long. I mean, this also links to the ability to develop projects which are more remote, develop projects which in many cases have a high participation of indigenous communities, and develop projects that where the benefits that are going to accrue, particularly when you're talking about biodiversity, the timeline might not be the same as the social benefits, right? So, which is the case of one of the projects we have in Colombia, where it's essentially a habitat bank, which is now on a blockchain, being tokenized, where the time for you to produce the biodiversity tokens in a regulated market can typically take 15 to 20 years. But you need to make sure that the benefits accrue to those who are there right today, right? So there is that difference in timing, which is super important. And that's yet another way where digital innovation can allow you to bring funding and get it in the hands of those who are in these areas today, even though the tokens themselves are only going to be traded in the market, you know, years to come. So I think that's super important. The financial engineering and the digital dimension of the financial engineering to bridge some of these problems, not just distance but time.
That actually brings me to Chandra. I want to lift it up a little bit beyond just carbon markets. If we think about other innovative instruments to increase climate finance, there's green bonds. The World Bank has announced a couple of really interesting novel approaches to green bonds, blue bonds, etc. How, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of government's appetite to accelerate digital transformation and leverage digital and technologies for this? If imagine that we have a bunch of innovators listening, where should they go, or at least how should they approach these government counterparts?
So in the World Bank, I think with the new president coming in and focusing a lot on scaling up the World Bank activities, and the terminology used is a better bank to get to a bigger bank. That's the move towards identifying what we call global challenge programs, which include forests, which include energy transition, but has a cross-cutting area of digital transformation. So the idea of leveraging, I don't think that's for me, for the World Bank. The idea of utilizing digital innovation in order to achieve the kind of things Yuri talked about, you know, efficiency, less friction, much lower cost, much higher accuracy. All of those things can be leveraged across almost any infrastructure or development investment. And I'll give you one example, which I think is the most exciting one, which has come out over the last 4 or 5 days. The World Bank board announced a $15 billion energy access program in Eastern and Southern Africa. all of this is going to be monitored on a digital platform of Prospect.io. And on top of that, taking it back to the carbon a little bit, we are going to build a MRV platform which will provide energy access to 100 million new people over the next 7 years. And I don't think it is possible. I don't think it is possible without using digital platform to monitor and execute interventions at this scale. So I think, Finn talked about Earth observation systems and the leverage they provide to better monitor and verify results in the nature-based solution area. Similarly, I think in the area of energy transition, the only way for us to execute at scale that is necessary is to utilize the advantages created by a digital ecosystem for monitoring, for verification, for executing much more efficiently.
That's fantastic. I mean, I'm very pleased to hear that. That's really great. Really, really important pieces to the puzzle there with the energy transition. Leticia, back to you. I'm going to ask you a similar question to Chandra. UNDP does a lot of capacity building work across countries, and you sometimes have country-based teams that are helping them to build or open source some of these solutions. Is there a way that innovators or entrepreneurs that are building some of these solutions can plug into that? Can they communicate what they do in a different way so it's more approachable to your government counterparts? Or is there any other way you see that we can bridge these two communities?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I was thinking, as Chandra was saying, that in one of our projects, the monitoring for the generation of ITMOS was going to be done by apps. And the farmers were responsible for using these apps in order to provide the data and information about the progress in the projects to that centralized database where the information would be then compiled and used for validation and verification. But actually the preliminary findings is that the farmers are not using the apps and that the information is not being sent. So I think it's great to have this debate here, but there is a huge gap between what we are discussing and the reality on the ground, and this needs to be an area for further investments. For UNDP, this is our core, and that's our thinking, that we need to make technology and the information available for people on the ground, and that it's great that technology is evolving, but the pace of the takeover of technology is not often the same. Another concern that we have as well, in particular in the African continent, is the extent to which this technology and the technology providers are coming from the global north, and not necessarily the investments are staying in these countries. So this is a key concern as well, to make sure that when this technology is being offered, that the benefits of the technology stay on the ground. The other issue that I was thinking as we were discussing the crediting, the rating agencies and all of that, is that for us, we are launching our Carbon Markets High Integrity Initiative on Monday. And for us, the integrity goes beyond the carbon component, and it includes social and environmental safeguards and the people on the ground. And this is a concern that we have as well, because oftentimes the solutions that have the greatest benefits for the people are not the most accurate in terms of carbon accounting. So I think, taking that into consideration and providing investors with information that goes beyond the technology as well is another important component. Finally, just to say that in creating the open code for the national registries, the idea is exactly that the national firms, the technology firms, can take this basis, so there is compatibility amongst the various registries and a minimum quality level, but that this will be adapted to the specific circumstances of these countries as well. So it goes back to adapting technology to the needs of the countries and the local communities to make sure that they take on the technology that's being offered to them. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Bill, tweaking the question a little bit so we don't double tap here. Can you talk to me a little bit about the work you did on digitizing green bonds before with All Infra in, I'm forgetting the name of it.
Bank of International Settlements?
Yes,
or,
exactly.
yeah.
Thank you. Because that
Sure.
was a really innovative effort. It was an innovative coalition of partners,
Yep.
leveraging a very novel technology, and I think it's a good proof point that this has been done, it could be scaled beyond.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a good sort of signal that there's institutional adoption. So we were involved in a project called Genesis 1 as well as Genesis 2. Genesis 1 was a digital green bond tech stack that had both the issuance of a digital green fixed income instrument in the form of a bond, and then bondholders get data feed from the assets so that, again, you're getting your impact metrics as a bondholder. So you know you're not getting your principal payments, but you're getting your impact data so that you can settle that, let's say, in your green accounting books. And Genesis 2, to kind of bring it to a little bit closer to the topic here, was taking that digital green bond product and adding another product staple to it, which is a digital carbon forward, called, in that case, an MOI. Actually, in the next panel with ECP, we'll talk a bit about some of these products. So the MOI is in Genesis 2 a 5-year digital carbon forward stapled to a green bond that can be separated after primary issuance, and then that gets settled with digital carbon units called mitigation outcome units, 1 metric ton digital units. And our partner in Genesis 2 is Goldman Sachs. We are now working on several, I can't get into too much detail, but several implementations of that product. But I think it's a really good model for, one, the power of why have a digital instrument, why tie the data to that, how does that relate to the carbon market, how does that relate to then the tracking and tracing, corresponding adjustments, and I guess, again, I think it's really important that in that case, Bank of International Settlements was the client, Hong Kong Monetary Authority was a client, UNFCCC was involved in Genesis 2 quite extensively, so it's a good signal of that institutional. It's not just the tech industry, these wild and wacky ideas, it's really, it's making sense to large institutions.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue, actually, to my question for Raf. Sure. So you, many other members of Climate Collective and others in this sort of digital innovation space have been working quite extensively with some of the standards and methodology bodies that established players of carbon markets. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how that's been? Because I think it's a really important point Bill has here. We need the established players to also think that this is a good idea and feel comfortable, and then embed that within their own organizations.
Sure. So, when we started Toucan over 3.5 years ago now, I thought I was building bridges, technological bridges, but it turns out we're building bridges between communities more than anything else, right? So, and this is what we're doing here in this panel, because I think for everybody here, it's like, digital is not, like, we live in a digital world, like, that's just the way it is, and it's obvious that digital solutions have a role to play in solving climate change, right? And so, but what we found is that, especially when it comes to like Web3 technologies, there's a huge gap of knowledge and understanding between, in this case, to answer your questions, the carbon standards, so Verra, Gold Standard, Puro, and all the others. And so it's a lack of understanding of like what can this technology do for us, and quite frankly also a fear, because the carbon market has already taken multiple beatings in the past. Let's say that like Web3 is powering most of the crypto industry, which keeps on taking one beating after the other. So why is it a good idea to put both of these things together? Like, it's like obviously there's a big like educational gap here. So we've been spending a lot of time with these various standards. We did a pilot with Gold Standard, for instance, which will be announced, or like, has been announced, but the results of that will be announced shortly. we've worked with Eco-Registry, we've obviously worked with Puro, and like, ultimately what it comes down to is just like being patient, understanding the questions, answering the questions, and really just building trust that, like with every technology, it depends on how you use it, what you can do with it, right? And it's not like a technology is good or bad. Like technology is just a technology, right? So yeah, like definitely put a different hat on and had to adapt to that change.
Amazing. Okay. Bear with me, Finn. I'm going to tweak it up again. I'm going to leverage the fact that you are a policy person, been in both governments and now private sector, and have a unique insight into the progress and the development of carbon markets. Would you tell us what you see over the horizon? Are you seeing convergence of voluntary and compliance markets? And if so, how and when?
It's a big question for a short space of time. But in short, I don't see simple convergence, but I do see both markets influencing one another. Governments can play a very important role in helping to build integrity, for instance, through mandating information disclosure, not just through Article 6, but in voluntary carbon markets. We believe governments can play an important role there. But equally, the private sector, which has been and is developing projects, will continue to develop projects that feed into public markets. And what's more, they won't just provide projects, but they will also provide capabilities, right? And I think we've listened to a few examples of the capabilities that the private sector can provide for governments. And then vice versa, I think governments will be a big important source of demand for voluntary carbon credits, whether they're labelled later down the line as Article 6 or something else. So I do think they'll play an important role for one another. I don't think success for government markets is guaranteed, though, unless they can develop the market in a new way, by leveraging some of these digital technologies, by accepting that carbon credits come with risks. And I think that's probably where it's important to acknowledge also that digitalization can't solve everything. It can solve for poor quality projects. It can help to shine a spotlight on them, but it can't solve them. It can't eliminate risk in the market, but it can help to manage it for sure.
That's actually a perfect ending to this, I will say. I will repeat that because I thought it was very thoughtful. Digitization cannot solve this on its own. Digital technologies, technology solutions are not going to solve all of the problems that we're faced, but they can help us manage the risk, they can help us accelerate progress towards these goals they need, and they can help us unlock new types of finance and partnerships to drive these bottom-up solutions that are dearly needed. We were on time, which I think no one else was today, so I'm quite proud of the panel. Do you have a specific question? Okay.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate. I do research on climate finance at the university. As someone coming from corporate finance, international finance, coming into the climate finance research, you will find that at the end of the day, what kind of evidence are you going to use? Because if you see there is no much time series analysis, having data for 30 years, 40 years, and you end up relying on some surveys, and the challenge of surveys. And that itself, we have been partnering with IDB and World Bank. I come from Somalia. In Somalia for a long time, we have found that most of the funding we get in Somalia and most of Sub-Saharan Africa are bilateral money, which is a small scale. Sometimes you find 50% of the money we receive is less than 500,000, 100,000, 200,000. But if you really do diagnosis analysis, you will find that, okay, to get 5 million, like for example, 100 million, $50 million, what kind of data that investor, whether it's private or public, is going to use in Somalia? For example, if my friend, the bill is going to give me like 50 million, what evidence is going to use? Then I really appreciate these digital solutions. But my worry is that it's still in the developed countries, staying, for example, in Switzerland and UK, US. It's not coming to the communities. I like my brother, what he says. And at the end of the day, it's the local communities that are suffering. And there is lack of also awareness most of the time. I think then my question is how we can bring these solutions into the local communities that need the most in sub-Saharan Africa and other developed countries in order for them to have more data that can attract more investors, which will help to accelerate the climate change problems that Anna said. It cannot wait for 50 years again to get data. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Very thoughtful question. And I think many panelists will be able to answer this in different ways, so I will make sure that they all find you after this. We've been told that we're out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up, but we'll come find you right after to answer that question. Thank you again so much for being here. I'm very grateful for all of you lending your expertise and your time to this important topic, and thanks all for listening.